Hi, welcome back to Teen Drama with me, Destiny B, and you might notice my tone being a little bit different today during today's episode, and it's also going to be one of my longer episodes because today we are talking about Juneteenth. Currently, it is June 18th, and I already posted today, and I don't know if I'm going to post it today so that you can know why we need to celebrate so hard tomorrow, or if I'm going to post it tomorrow so that you know why we're celebrating so hard. But anyways, I'm going to today tell you the history of Juneteenth and also the history of slavery, going more into depth on it and things that school didn't teach you so that you know, like, oh, because I feel like the way school described it to it, it's like, oh, you're just doing work without, like, getting paid money and getting beat every once in a while, which, yes, does sound bad, but it doesn't sound to the extent of what it was. And I feel like we need to know, like, the backstory of slavery and then also the backstory of Juneteenth so that tomorrow, whenever y'all are out partying, you'll come party really freaking hard knowing that it is an important thing. Okay, so we're going to start back a really long time ago in Spain. So Spain, so first of all, slavery existed before the European slave trade, but specifically we are talking about the European slave trade, which is one of the largest ones and definitely left a huge impact on like America and literally across the world. It was one of the most global things ever. And this system of the European slave trade relied specifically on the triangular trade route, which essentially took goods to Africa and then took like resources to Europe and slaves to America. So let's break down the triangular trade route so that you can really understand how things were moving and why people thought it was so important to have slaves. So Europe was responsible for creating goods and they would sell these everywhere, and that was their economic factor. And then we had America, which was responsible for providing resources. So, you know, your crops and what most people are so commonly familiar with slaves handling, your cotton, things like that. And then, of course, Africa, which people would take slaves from. So this whole thing started when the Spanish came and conquered everything in the Americas. And they originally started with Native Americans, having them as slaves and using them for their labor forces. And also make sure that I forgot to say this at the beginning of the video, but make sure you're taking care of yourself during this video because it does get into some dark topics such as suicide, some gruesome things. I'm trying to keep it as clean as possible. I'm not going to go into super specific details because even as I was researching this, it kind of was throwing me a bit and I was like, I can't even do this right now. So I'm not even going to talk about some of the deeper stuff. But just if you are getting uncomfortable, just turn off the video. I think it's important that people know about things that happened, but honestly, if it's getting too much for you and it's causing you pain mentally or emotionally, turn it off. Actually turn it off, because hopefully you do end up listening to the whole episode though. It doesn't get too bad because I'm not going to make it too bad. Anyways, so they were using Native Americans for labor. However, as you know, they wanted to kill all the Americans. The Native Americans, at the time they called them Indians. So, you know, they wanted to kill off all the Indians. There was a lot of disputes between them and they were running out of labor, and that became an issue. So they decided to derive from Africa labor. So the first ships came over and they brought over a couple hundred Africans. But some of the kings and queens in Spain we're like, we're not doing that. Not because it was morally incorrect, not because we're harming people, not even because of the diseases and plagues that could come from trading like that. No, because they believed that Africans were barbaric, and especially because most Africans weren't Christian because it had not been brought over to Africa yet. So they believed that if the Africans brought over the barbaric and non-Christian ways, that they would corrupt Spaniards. Yeah. So they did not do that until there was a huge economic drop in Spain, and August 18th of 1518, King Charles V granted a charter to transport 4,000 slaves on one condition. Mind you, his grandparents, not his parents, but his grandparents, were the ones who created the law that you can't do this. On the condition that on their way to Spain and the different countries that Spain had at the time, And when they were there and on the ships to get there, they would be taught Christianity and indoctrinated into Christianity. That way they didn't like rot their brains or whatever. Which honestly, right now, I truly don't care what your religion is. I don't care if you're Christian. I don't care if you're Muslim. I don't care if you're a Buddhist. I don't care if you're a freaking Satanist, to be so for real. I honestly couldn't care less what you are or what you aren't are. I don't care if you're atheist. But indoctrinating someone else because you think their religion is evil, quote unquote, is crazy to me. Regardless of what your religion is or what your beliefs are, let that person do them. Unless they are literally hurting other people physically, hurting other people, mentally hurting other people, or putting in things like pedophilia, like actually hurting other people, their beliefs can't hurt you, so leave them alone. That's just me. I don't know what y'all believe, but that's just me. Okay, so when this slave trade was happening, let's talk about the freaking ships, because these things were crazy. There were tons of ships. There was one in particular called the Zong, I believe, which in 1871 transported 442 slaves. 61 of them died, and so did 7 crew members, and it was put on trial for like a bunch of things. But the slave ships were hugely built after this. They were built very big, and they would have a below deck area and an above deck area. The below deck area is where the slaves would be kept, and it was a little bit under 4 feet. So to get the slaves on the ships, they would start with the pre-boarding process, which is where they would take the slaves, and usually actually the like white people who were like the crew members and stuff wouldn't actually get the slaves. It would be people who were pre-enslaved who would do it. So like originally it was white people, and then they were like, hey guys, let's just like beat the other slaves and get them to do it, because that's a great idea. Which it honestly was. If that was the goal, that worked for them, because they got them to do it, and then those were the people who were dying from disease and such because of the conditions that they were putting these ships on. It was super uncleanly, which is why crew members were dying. Also rebellion, but we'll get into that later. So basically, they had all these ships, and whenever you would get indoctrinated, you would pretty much get like beat and stuff, what you were taught in school, into being put. And I'm not saying like it's like not, it's like a less than, it's not an important detail. I'm just saying like these are things that you've already been taught, so I'm not going to go into good detail about it. I don't know if you get taught about this in other countries like that were into it, but I know in the US we were taught about this pretty much every grade, but it was kind of the same thing over and over again. Black History Month goes over slavery, they got beat, they had to pick cotton, bad, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and it was kind of that over and over again, just in bigger words each year. So they'd be stripped of their clothes, possessions, and hair. So yes, they would shave their heads, which is why like if you see the pictures of Africans working and stuff, like the paintings and stuff, they all have short hair because they would shave their hair before they boarded. So by the time they got there, they would have a little bit of hair. Then the boarding process would start, and this would occur over weeks or months, and it took a long time to board them because it was thousands of slaves. It would be between hundreds and thousands of slaves because, again, these ships were built huge because it literally sent them into the biggest economic boom that it's been in a very long time, the United States. Specifically, like the Americas, what we know is the United States now. Specifically the Americas, though. But currently, this was like Spain. So they would basically be boarding over weeks and months, and they would live on the deck in wooden houses that the crew had built for them. And there would be nets on the outside of the boats because, okay, you don't understand. So being forced to work was so bad, and the conditions were so bad that slaves would jump off of the boats to try and themselves. So they put nets on side of it so that you couldn't try to like end it all. Which honestly is fair enough. If I was a slave, I would too. I'd be like, look, man, I'm not doing this. Seems like a better option to me. But, Okay, so then once you got into the boat, you would be separated into 3 groups. So there was men, women, and children. And that's how the groups are pretty much separated now anyways. So the men and the women, whenever they were on the deck, were separated by a brigade, and the children could roam freely between the two if they wanted to, and yes, they were bringing children, by the way, in case y'all were wondering, which I feel like a lot of people were like, oh, like the children were born when they were there. Like, no, they brought children over. They didn't really care. They didn't see you as human. In fact, one master actually quoted, I think it was like, hold up, I actually wrote it down because I thought it was so freaking crazy. They are not human but a beast and should be dominated. So yeah. Anyways, so basically then there was the below deck area, which is where they would spend most of their time, like sleeping, things like that. Also, there was no bathrooms on the ships for slaves. There was like, the crew members would like pee in the water and stuff, but the slaves, they would literally like have to like crap their pants while they were like below deck. Yeah, and that's why there were so many freaking diseases. Anyways, so they would be separated by women and men, and again, the children were free to roam around. The women were retained to their corridors where they were staying, and they would just kind of chill out there. Well, not chill out, but like, you know what I'm saying. And then the men were chained in pairs and put down there, like the grown men, because, you know, they're stronger and they don't want them to like be able to revolt. And because the women had slightly more freedom, if there was rebellions on these boats, it was typically not only the women who planned it, but they would also lead it and bring it out. Like the men typically weren't actually involved in rebellions. Sometimes they were on boats where they didn't chain the men together, but they typically did. So it was usually the women who would rebel, which they didn't win quite often because they didn't have weapons. While they had numbers, they didn't have weapons. They didn't have men who were, you know, big, burly, strong guys. They just had their brains. And they were in horrible living conditions, so they were most likely sick, and like it was hard. However, some of them were pretty strong because they were forced to work out while on ships. And this wasn't all the ships. This was like a 50-50 type of thing. So they were forced to work out so that they'd be better to sell once they got to the Americas. And they would also sometimes be forced to entertain crew members by learning to sing and dance and things. They would also get countless diseases, like I said, from like crapping their pants. And the most common ones that slaves died from, by the way, about 15% of slaves and crew members would just die on the passage here. 15%. And to put into numbers that for you, if you don't understand how large of a number 15% is, between 1525 and 1866 or 56, I don't remember, 2.5 million Africans were taken across the Atlantic Ocean, but approximately 2 million died. You have to understand that in that time numbers, because imagine our numbers now, but this was the 15th and 18th century. So there was this was the 14th and 17th century. So there was so much less people. So the fact that it was that many is an astonishing number. Because looking at today's numbers, that would probably be in the billions or trillions if we're comparing the amount of people that live here today. However, so yeah, that happened. And the diseases they got were typically dysentery, malaria, yellow fever, smallpox, measles, and influenza. Yeah, all those are things that people are dying from. Yeah, so anyways, so the men went through a lot of crap. So if you refused to do anything, if you were considered disobedient, you would typically be flogged, which just means beaten. And they wouldn't just beat you with paddles and stuff. Like, they had special tools made specifically for slaves, and I actually can't pronounce most of the names of these weapons, but just trust you don't want them. But there were spectrum okons, I think it's called, which were to force you to open your mouth to eat, because some people try to starve themselves to death. And slaves were typically only fed rice and beans. So if you're wondering why those are so prominent in Black culture, that's why, because we were force fed them. But yeah, it's like a thing that they put in your mouth and they crank it and it like opens your mouth forcefully and they could put food down your mouth. And while the women had more freedoms than the men, they were typically raped and sexually assaulted. And a lot of them, I think it was like 30%, would come to the Americas with child of their abusers. And I'm like, that's actually horrible. Anyways, then they would get to the selling point of this whole entire thing, which is literally horrible. So they'd come from typically the Africa part, but like the coast issues, and go through the Middle Passage, which is what it was called once you got to the ship. And once they got there, they were sold like literal cattle. So they were first washed and cleaned and sometimes oiled to make them look better. And then the men would check out the other men, and be like, okay, these ones are muscular, they can do good work, this one looks fast, this one looks like it works hard, whatever. And yes, I'm saying it because we were not seen as humans then. And then they would check out the women not only as work ethic, but can they carry children to make more slaves for me? Do I find them sexually arousing? Because sometimes the slave masters would purposefully like buy women simply just to grape them. Like that was the whole reason they wanted them. And then not only were they sold on an auction like cattle were, but they would typically be branded on the cheek once bought. Like literally cattle. So yeah. Which is a whole issue. And then once they got there, they were typically stripped of their identities, and even their names were changed. So like, let's say you had a very African name, they would change your name to a very white name. Like you went from a name that I probably can't pronounce to Amanda. Why? Because they want to erase our entire culture. And I'm not going to go into a bunch of stuff on actual slavery because it just gets super gruesome here. But the whole thing is that no matter how old you were in a horrible housing situation, you had horrible food situations going on, you were working long, hard hours, typically in horrible weather conditions for literally zero pay, and you were getting touched, you were getting beat, you were like, all these things are happening, and the people profiting are the people who own you. Yeah. Anyways, so now that we know why it is so how freaking bad slavery was, let's get into the history of Juneteenth itself, because the whole reason with me telling you that whole 15-minute backstory was so that you can fully appreciate Juneteenth. So if you don't know what Juneteenth is the combination of the month June and the date 19, and it is considered the second Independence Day, but it truly, because July 4th is the first Independence Day, which is where the US was independent, but truly this is the first Independence Day because it's the first time that everyone was free in America, not just white people, not just, this is the first time everyone was free. So truly this is the first Independence Day, but I'm not even going to get into arguing this. And also, a lot of people, this is when slaves were truly free. And a lot of people recently have been arguing over, is this for black people, anyone with dark skin tones, or is it just for African Americans, people who are original descendants of slaves? And I'm going to clear that up for y'all right now. And this is not opinionated based. And I'm not saying this is fact based, I got this out something, but let's be so serious. This isn't a true opinion, because let's be so serious here. Number one, we don't need to be divided over something that's supposed to bring us together. And number two, baby, I don't care where you're from. I don't care if you're Irish and you were born black and there is no part of your descendants was in America. If you had came to America, then you know what they would have done? They would have changed you up and you would have been a slave too. So yes, all people who have our dark skin should celebrate Juneteenth, because you know what? Y'all would have been enslaved too. Whether or not you had descendants here or not. It doesn't matter what type of black you are, you were enslaved. It doesn't matter if you were light skinned, unless you could get away with being white, you were enslaved. So I hate it whenever recently I've been hearing people talking about this is only for people who have, African descent from here, from America, who were slaves. No, this is from anyone with dark skin. So let's stop the debate, because let's be so, and that is fact. So let's stop the debate right now, because we're not gonna, no. Okay, anyways, so a lot of people believe that slavery came to an end with the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. But while it legally came to an end, it didn't until June 19th, 1865. This is because a lot of people from the North didn't like this and would move to the South to keep their slaves or to grow plantations and things for economic reasons. And they would try to hide the fact that slaves were free. And they did successfully do this for 2 years. However, Texas was the last state to have free slaves. So if you were wondering, I knew about Juneteenth a lot before. Some of my friends didn't, but I know that it was pretty much only celebrated in Texas until 2021, when it became a national holiday under President Biden. And I don't care what y'all's political beliefs are. I don't know. I'm not super big onto politics, and I don't know what Biden did not do, but I am very happy that it's a national holiday, because it definitely deserves that recognition. So I don't know what all he did, and I'm not saying he's a good guy, a bad guy. I'm not saying nothing about politics. I'm just saying I'm very happy that it's a national holiday now. Anyways, but so most people in the South didn't get the news. Didn't get the news that the Emancipation Proclamation had come out. Didn't get the news that they were free. So the black people did not know they were free yet, okay? until the Union troops showed up in Galveston, Texas, which is still a city. So if y'all were wondering, go visit Galveston, I guess. And they came to tell them that the 250,000 Black people were to be freed. And they were. And they all celebrated being free and everything. But Juneteenth wasn't first like officially celebrated until the anniversary of it being free. And it was pretty much only celebrated in Texas and hardcore celebrated in Galveston. And they were celebrating the year anniversary of them being free. And that's when they started calling it Juneteenth. So they celebrated the first year like hardcore. Yeah. So that's when all Black people in America were officially freed. And yeah. So in America now we do have Juneteenth, which is where we obviously celebrate slavery being out. But everything I just told y'all over the past 20 minutes, 41 seconds about slavery, about Juneteenth, all these things is because I feel like it's a big thing for us to be free, because it's not just, oh, you know, our ancestors free. It's like, no, we're free. Like, it's not just our ancestors. And I'm saying this as a 15-year-old girl, because even if we weren't free, we would still be enslaved. So let's celebrate. Let's bring it out. And I'm probably going to post this today so that y'all know exactly what's going on. Y'all can educate your freaking stupid friends, because I have some friends that are a little slow and been like, well, Juneteenth's not a real holiday. And I'm like, baby, you going to sit here and get this 20-minute lecture, because we ain't going to have none of that. And I honestly could have gone on for longer, but I didn't want to get into the super dark stuff. But Juneteenth is very important. So make sure that you're dressing in your colors. Your black, your red, your green, your yellow. And make sure that you are, you know, celebrating that freedom that we have now. Even if you're white, go out and celebrate that you're not a butthole like some of your ancestors. Sorry if that came out rude, but yeah. Anyways, that's all for today with Teen Drama with me, Destiny B, and I will see y'all on Juneteenth. And hopefully y'all have a wonderful day. And I live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and there's a lot of celebrations going on. So please comment below if you have any like pictures or anything of the Juneteenth celebrations y'all are doing. I would love to see them. Okay, bye.